So welcome to the call. Just wanted to thank everyone for their attendance today. I'd like to welcome you to the secrets of creating a successful business plan. Today we're going to be discussing the ins and outs of how to build a business plan, some of the pitfalls that people will encounter when developing their business plan. We'll be also talking about some of the simple ways to actually streamline or fast track the business planning process. So as we're going through this call today, please feel free to ask questions. You can do that in the question box on your right-hand side. So feel free to to put any questions in there so that we can get a bit of an understanding as to where you're focused and what some of the challenges might be as we go. So for those who I haven't met before, my name is David Guest, and I just want to tell you a little bit about my background. I've been coaching businesses and helping business owners understand how to plan their businesses and how to grow their businesses for the past 13 years. Just came back from our local conference, the Asia Pacific Conference, where we were nominated and also the winner of an award for running our group coaching program, which incorporates our planning methodology. So I'm pretty excited today to talk about how we use that planning methodology, some of the secrets, some of the tips, because I think one of the biggest challenges the typical small business owner has is finding the time to plan, understanding what the plan needs to be, and actually getting the detail into that plan. So let's get into it. First question that I want you to consider is, what's the purpose of having a business plan? Because typically, if I ask people in business, most people do know that they need a business plan. The challenge that most people have is, even though they know they need one, they don't have one. Or if they have one, it's out of date or it's in their head. So let's talk about the reasons why, because this is one of the biggest drivers to actually getting your business plan into play. So the first thing that a business plan will give you is clarity. Now, see, the funny thing with clarity is that when people say they're too busy in their business, now there's a bit of a distinction. Being busy doesn't mean you're being productive. And when people say, well, I'm not really sure what I should be doing, or I'm getting distracted, or I've just got too much work on, what it essentially means to me is that they're actually not clear on what they're actually trying to achieve within their business. Now, if all you think about when you go to business is what I need to complete, what do I need to accomplish, what's on my to-do list, without having a real picture of the end, you've really got sort of not a lot of clarity. And the example I normally give here is that if we think about a 4-year-old taking a Great Dane for a walk, the question is, who's walking who? So clarity is the first reason we need to plan. The second reason that we need to plan is to have focus. And one of the reasons we do need focus is, as a business owner, as you're probably aware, you're wearing several different hats in a day. And what that means is that one minute you're doing customer delivery, next minute you're dealing with collection, next minute you're dealing with some issues with some of the equipment or the plant. And so really we're all over the place. And the challenge with this sort of environment is that when we do have that moment of peace where things start to seem to run streamlined, the question is, what do I do next? So having this business plan is really about having some focus as well. Now, the other key area here is the difference between a strategic and tactical view of the business. Now, what do I mean by strategic versus tactical? Well, a tactical view is, what do I need to do next? And really, it's about focusing on those items or those specific things that need to be done, like a to-do list. It might be to do with getting proposals out. It might be to do with responding to customer requests. It might even be to do with going out on a sales call or launching an email, like a marketing newsletter. Strategic. What strategic is all about is it's about taking a step back, and it's about looking at the business from a bigger picture point of view. Now, what we're looking for here is really understanding where we're going with the business in the long term. And what I mean by that is really thinking in terms of, what is the structure of the business flow? What is the long-term overall objectives that we're trying to achieve? And what are the strategic systems we can put in place to make sure that we're thinking more longer term? The fourth thing that I put down here is accountability. Because I think the other issue, and most small business owners have this, is that the boss is also the number one employee. And what I mean by that is, as a business owner, we typically are our own bosses, which means that we can let ourselves get away with not doing things that we know need to be done. Now, the danger of this is that we often will let ourselves off the hook on things like making sales calls, or we might let ourselves off the hook on things like employing the next employee in our business. because we'll give ourselves excuses. So we might say, the market's a bit soft at the moment, or we might say that it's just not the right time to do this. So I'm just going to delay that decision a bit longer. Or sometimes the actual numbers that we do commit to with ourselves, which might be dollars oriented or it might be new client oriented, can change over time because they're not documented. So the accountability part of the plan is really key as well. And the final point I wanted to make here is this whole notion of confidence. Because you look at the small business owner trying to grow their business, and if their confidence is not there, the job becomes a lot harder. Now, having a plan in place and knowing that you're on purpose to the plan means that you can make sure that your confidence is high, which means that your effectiveness is better. So there's so many reasons why we need a business plan, but you really need to think about the reasons why before you go into the planning process. So once we've done that, let's talk about what the business plan is going to provide for us. Well, the very first thing is perspective. And when we think about perspective, what this is about is really understanding the business, almost taking a step out of the business while having a helicopter view. Now, if we don't do this, what typically happens is we get stuck in the day-to-day activity of the business and we're consistently just running, chasing our tails. Now, we might even think we're on track. But until we take a step back and until we start looking at what's going on, sometimes we just feel like we're not actually going anywhere. So we need to make sure that we're keeping a track of our perspective and making sure that we stand back and have a look at the business from that bigger picture point of view and really just trying to understand what's going on. So once we've got this perspective sorted out, the next thing we need to think about is, well, okay, what is this planning thing all about? Now, this is where I often see people get confused because it's not about the plan. It's not about how pretty your plan is. It's actually about the thinking process that you need to go through to get your plan in play. And what I mean by this is that we do need to be thinking in terms of what is it that we're going to do? How can we do it? So we're constantly looking at the planning process. Now, I'm going to talk about how often we should plan and how we should address our business plan as we move through this conversation. But what I want you to remember is it's not really about the goal. It's actually about the planning process. And this is the strategic thinking that actually allows us to create some new avenues within our business, to innovate how we deliver, and to actually just do things in a better way or a more leveraged way. So let's talk about how to plan. Now, the very first thing, and this sounds a bit odd, but we should be planning backwards. And when I talk about backwards, what I mean is that when people say, well, I need to plan my marketing campaign, or how much should I invest in marketing, or should I have a marketing budget, and what should it be? See, here's the answer. That's not the right question. The question should always revolve around what are you trying to get out of the business? So if we think about what our end result is, and we begin with that end in mind, then we can actually start building the business plan. Now, you'll notice I've also said life first and then business, because this is another error where people will build a business based on where they currently are within the business and they currently are within their process. But really, if you think about what business actually is, it's a means to an end. And what do I mean by that? Well, what I mean by that is that our business should be providing us the lifestyle or the income so that we can live our life. So when we talk about planning, the very first thing we need to do is think about what the end is. Now, the end to me is what is that business going to provide for you as a lifestyle? And we really need to work on that before we work on the business plan. Because creating a plan just for the sake of getting a business that's bigger is not very inspiring for people. But if we can build a business plan that actually gives us the lifestyle that we're looking for, all of a sudden, the plan has a bit of emotion behind it or a bit of drive. So where do we start? Well, the very first thing I'll encourage anyone to do in their business planning process is to do a review or look through the rearview mirror. And what do I mean by this? Well, see, the definition of insanity is to do the same thing and expect a different result. So when it comes to business planning, what we really want to think about is, well, what did we achieve over that last period of time? Now, if it's an annual plan, you look at the last year. If it's a quarterly plan, you look at the last quarter. But the real key component of this is to actually analyze what has happened and what have been the results of the activity to date. Now, the reason we do this before we start our plan is because I want to get those lessons and incorporate them into my planning into the future. See, too often I see when people go into a business planning process, what they're doing is they're building the plan without really taking much notice of what happened in the past period. Now, the danger of doing this is that we can end up creating a similar plan or saying, well, this time it's going to be different, when in reality we know a lot different, and we know that we're not going to get there. So the planning process becomes it just becomes benign. It actually is not effective. So getting this rear view mirror component of the plan going is key. Once we've done that and we've analysed what's happened in the past period of time, then we need to move on to the bigger picture. So what is the bigger picture? Well, it starts with dreams. And this sounds a bit fluffy, I know, but let's be real about life and what we're trying to achieve in our business. And if we don't have a dream for the future, if we don't have a big picture of where we're looking to go, then what are we doing it for? And often people say, oh, this whole dreaming thing, really, I just want to make a bit more profit. Now, I want a few more clients. I want a few more of this. The problem with these sorts of statements is that they're very small-minded and they're really not producing an end result. They're like a band-aid. And we want to avoid the band-aid situation when creating the business plan. What we actually want to build is a business that's going to move us closer to our dreams. So we start with a dream, and really, as Carl Sandburg said, nothing happens unless first a dream. So what is your dream? What is your dream of your future? And how do we go about doing this? Well, the simplest way to do it is to create a thing called a dream chart. Now, this is a visual. This sort of explains it. Why do we need to have things like this? I mean, really, some of these things might not be what you want. Whatever you want to put in your dream chart, that's up to you. But the dream chart is about what would happen if we had unlimited time, unlimited money. What are the sorts of things we could do? Now, why would we do this if we know that these things are way beyond our reach? Well, there is a very psychological reason. And what we're doing with dream charts or with dream building is we need to start expanding the rubber band and expanding the rubber band of our thoughts and deciding on what we would do with unlimited time and money takes away that shackle, let's call it, or resistance of what happens when we look at things like visuals. No visuals. Thank you. Let's see if we can get these visuals happening. Okay, we should have some visuals. Hopefully we have some visuals now. Hooray. Thank you. Okay, so we talk about the dream chart. So what does the dream chart look like? That. Now that we have some visuals, hopefully we can get back on track. So the dream chart needs to be visual. And the reason it needs to be visual is it's something we can put up in our office or we can put it up in our place of business. And it just reminds us of the things that we could potentially have as part of our future. Now, remember, when we're talking about dreams, we're talking about stretching our thinking. We're talking about removing the limitations that we have on what we've sort of potentially got. Because when I ask people to do this, typically what they'll say to me is, geez, my dream is just to pay my mortgage. Now, that's not a dream. That's a task, right? And the problem with that sort of task is if that's all you're dreaming for, if you're building a business just to pay the mortgage, you're probably not building a big enough business to give you the lifestyle you want. So this dream chart process is so key because out of a dream chart, what usually happens is we define what's really important to us. And it may not be anything that shows up on the dream chart. It'll certainly show me the flavor of what you actually chase. Now, for some people, it's going to be as simple as charity. They want to make enough money that they can actually give money away. For other people, they're going to want to have a holiday house. For other people, it's going to be a trip overseas with the kids. It really doesn't matter what it is. What matters is that you go beyond your current capacity when you think of dreams. And really, so when you do think of dreams, you just got to push yourself out there and say, well, with unlimited time and money, what are the sort of things I would have? Now, I'll just give you a word of warning on the dream chart exercise. Typically what happens is a lot of people will push back and say, well, I don't really want much. Or their little voice inside their head is going to say, what are you doing all this stuff for when it's not part of your reality? Your reality is that, if you can make 50,000 or 100,000 a year, you'd be happy. Well, the trick here is to actually expand your mind. And expanding your mind here will actually make you think differently about what's possible within the business. Because unless we think it's even possible, then what happens is we end up getting stuck in our little rut of a world. So the dream chart process is really about dreaming big and using that as a methodology for capturing the next part, which we're going to be talking about. Now, the next part we're going to talk about is going to be what happens once we've got these dreams. And what dreams should lead on to is a thing is known as goals. Now, goals is a component of the planning process. Now, why do we need goals? Well, the obvious answer is that Goals are part of our reticular activating system. And what do I mean by that? Well, see, there's a part of our brain, and we all have this. It's called the reticular activating system. And what does it do? It's actually the compass within our brain, and it's actually a section at the back of your head. And it actually forces us to focus in on certain things because we can't possibly absorb all the information that's in front of us at any point in time. Now, the reason we need to know about this reticular activating system is whether you think you're using it or not, it's in use every single moment of every single day. And what it does is it actually focuses us in on the important activities that we need to do. So just as a simple example, if you set a goal, or I'll give you a simple example. If you bought a car, and I don't know if anyone on the call has had this experience, but you buy this brand new Toyota Corolla, and you're driving down the street in this red Corolla, and all of a sudden you'll notice there's another one, and there's another one, and there's another one. What's actually happened is there's no more Toyota Corollas on the road. It's just that you are now focused in on that Corolla. Now, the same is going to happen in your business. So if we don't set our goals within our business, what happens is they're dictated by the events that occur to us. So if you're having a difficult day with, your first client rings in the morning with a problem, and as soon as you hang up from that client, another client rings in with a problem, and another one rings in with a problem, soon enough, all you're seeing is problems. And so you've gone into this negative goal setting mechanism, which means you're anticipating the next call could be a problem as well. So knowing that we have this reticular activating system in our brain, and knowing that we could actually program it for our success is a key part of goal setting. So when people say, why do we need goals? The simple answer is because that's the way our brain operates. And if we don't have our goals clear, then what happens is we create goals along the way based on the circumstances within our lives, which is much more reactive than proactive. So going back to the dream chart, what we need to do is go through this dream building process so that we can actually start creating almost a field of choices so that we can now start looking at, well, what are the things in there that we actually do want as goals? Because the only real difference between a dream and a goal is the goal has a deadline, and a dream is basically something that may never happen. So how do you do this goal setting thing? See, there's a couple of keys to goal setting that you need to know. The very first thing is that a goal is an end result. So it's an outcome. And when we set our goals, what we need to be thinking in terms of is not whether we should be doing more things. It's more about the end result of those activities. So if you think about the business goal, my first question to the business owner is, what is it going to look like when it's finished? Now, what does finished mean? For a lot of people, finished means either retirement, it means selling the business, or it could even mean just getting the business to a stage where I can actually do the hours that I want to do. Now, for some people, that'll be 5 hours a week. For some people, it'll be 40 hours a week. But let's talk about what will the business look like when it's finished, and that becomes the end in mind from a business perspective. Once again, I would link this back to your personal goals, and I'd say, well, what does your life look like if you had the perfect situation? So if I had a magic wand like Harry Potter and I could give you anything you wanted in life, what would it look like? That's what the end should be like. And when we're setting our goals, we need to be thinking about those ends. Now, there's a couple of rules around goal setting. There's a couple of variations on this, but I'll explain the importance of it as we go through. It's called the SMART goal filter. Now, when we're setting these goals within our business, the very first thing is that they need to be specific. Now, by specific, I mean anything with the words more, less, greater. Those sorts of words are very vague. Because if I say I want to make more money this year, or I just need a few more clients, it doesn't actually tell me much about how much more. And so I need to really hone in on things. The other thing is to be wary of words like I want to be happier, I want to be less stressed, because how do I measure it? If I can't measure the outcome, how can I tell if the goal's been achieved? Not even from a conscious point of view, but even from a programming point of view. So our goals need to be quite specific, as in areas. If within business, it's fairly easy. It's usually going to be focused around revenue or profit. It's going to be focused around hours. Within our personal life, it needs to be, do we want to travel? And if we want to travel, where to? And so it needs to be something specific like that. Where do we want to live? What sort of house? How much is that house worth? What's it going to look like? Measurable means it needs to be something tangible. So the nice thing about using money in business as a measure is it does tell us whether the business is running well. So I prefer to focus on profitability than turnover, because a good friend of mine once said it's not about turnover, it's about leftover. So what is the measurable profit that you want to achieve? Now, achievable means it's within reason or within reach. So, coming up with, well, I want to make $1 million in the next 3 months. Is it achievable? Well, yes, for some people. But if it's outside of the realm of your reality, then it's probably not going to work as a goal. And if anything, it's going to work as an inverse goal because you're just going to laugh when you think about it, and it's not even something worth addressing. Now, you'll notice the R stands for results, and this is about being an outcome-oriented goal. And results refers to, well, what is the result of my activities? So often when we talk to people about personal goals, sometimes people say, well, my goal is to go to the gym 3 times a week. Now, there is a challenge with that goal because it is specific and measurable and it is achievable, but it's not a result. It's actually an activity. Now, the issue with this activity is from a subconscious point of view, we can fail that goal just by missing out one day. So if we think in terms of what the outcome is that we're trying to achieve, it could be that we're either going to lose some weight or we're going to run a marathon, or within business, it's going to be that we have a lifestyle that we can attain, or we're going to have a profit at the end of the year, which is a result. Now, the obvious one at the end is time frame. As I mentioned before, the difference between a dream and a goal is getting it within a certain time frame. So we need to work on these goals and we need to make sure that they fit within the SMART filter. Now, there is a formula around goals, and it's a formula for life success. It has 3 components to it. The first one is be, the second one is do, and the third one is have. So let's just quickly go through this. So if we talk about outcome-oriented goals, it's generally going to be focused on the end of this, which is the have. What do you want to have in life? Now, the interesting thing about these outcome-oriented goals or result-oriented goals is that it's usually created by a combination of what we do and who we are, or our identity, or who we see ourselves as. Now, if we think about those 2 components, I like to look at this as a formula and say, well, our identity, or who we are, multiplied by our activity will give us our result. Now, let me explain this in a simple way. I don't know if anyone's heard the story on the lottery winners and what happens with these guys, but typically if someone wins Tax Lotto, and they might win maybe $5 million, so they end up having $5 million. Now, the challenge normally is that they don't know what a millionaire does with their money in a lot of cases. So the statistics will tell us that they'll lose that money within 2 years. Now, why does that happen? Well, if I give someone $5 million and they don't know how to manage the money, chances are that they're going to get either they're going to manage it poorly, or they're going to go into investments without any real understanding or knowledge around the investments. So they'll probably not put that money in the same place as someone who's familiar with that money. So what we want to think about is, what do we need to do within our organization or within our lives to get the result, but also just as importantly, who do we need to be to get those results? So just to give you the understanding of the formula, often working harder is not going to get us a goal. I've seen people do this where they'll say, I'll just put in some extra hours. Now, putting extra hours, let's say if you don't shift your identity, so who you be or who you are is the same person, but you work harder. See, 0 times 100 equals 0. So if we don't shift the identity, we may not get the result. But now the reverse is true as well. When people work on their knowledge, on their skills, on how they see themselves, they might actually become a leader. So who they be, but if they don't do any more work, 100 times 0 is still 0. So one of the keys to getting a good result with your goals is to make sure that you do the activities of a person who's worthy of that goal. In the situation of the Tax Lotto winner, the very first thing they need to do is educate themselves on how to be a millionaire. And then they can do the things that a millionaire does. So when we talk about our goals, we need to then work backwards into the activities and also the identity. Now, we'll drill into these 2 areas shortly, because part of our planning isn't just about doing the activities, but it's also about building our knowledge as well. So once we understand our goal setting mechanism, we need to start thinking in terms of time frames. Now, my favorite time frame for goal setting is going to be the 12-month window. But when we start with an end in mind, we might go to 5 or 10-year goals first. And we're going to say, in 10 years' time, what would we like our business to look like, or our lives to look like? That should be your first point of goal setting. Then we can work backwards and say, great, to get that result in 10 years, what do we need to have in 5 years? And then we can work out back to 12 months, and then we can work back to shorter periods of time. So when we go into the planning process, we're going to use those goals as milestones to make sure that we're actually moving in the right direction. So after we look at this formula, the next thing we need to look at is the planning component. Now on the screen now, you'll see a very basic 90-day plan. And you'll notice a couple of components I need to point out. And the first one being that there is a timeline at the top of the page. Now, when we put our plans together, the big difference between goals and plans is that plans are focused on activities. Okay, so they're focused on the actions. And you'll notice down the bottom of this plan, there's a learning component, because this is about changing who we believe ourselves to be or who our identity is. And then we talk about the activities as well. Because if anyone's been through this process where we've implemented some plans or we've implemented some strategies within our business and they fail or they stop being implemented, for example, team meetings, what's generally happened is we've thought it's a great idea, we've instigated it, we've handed it over to someone else, but there's no momentum behind it because we actually haven't completed installing the process. So our plan needs to be over a time period and it needs to focus on the activities. So let's talk about the planning methodology or the process because people do get confused between goals and plans. And the reason they get confused is because if you think about what a goal is an outcome. If you think about what a plan is actually the steps that will take us towards the outcome. So how do we plan? Well, we start with the smallest increments. So the first sort of the part of planning is before I get people to create a business plan, I say, what's your day plan look like? And to me, a day plan is pretty simple. It's about looking at towards the end of your day, you write a to-do list for the next day. Now, yes, it's very tactical, but it also makes sure that we've got our activities that we need to work on the next day. So there's 3 stages to doing a daily plan. The first one is to list the top 5 or 6 activities that you want to do in the day. The second stage is to prioritize those activities. And the third and usually the most critical stage is to take those activities and place them into your diary. Because the difference between a to-do list and a diary is time frame. A to-do list is what we call discretionary activities, which means we may or may not do them in that period. But as soon as we block out time in our calendar, it's a commitment to time. So the key to planning is to get into this daily routine of making sure that we've got a daily plan. Now, I usually try and do these the night before, the evening, or at the end of the day. And the reason that I do my top 6 things at the end of the day is I do my top 6, I prioritize them, I look at those top 3 things at the top of the list and make sure there's time in my calendar to do that tomorrow. And then I can put it in there and I can go home and I can switch off from work. Now, a funny thing happens when we do that is that our subconscious brain goes to work. I don't know if anyone else has had this experience, but I'll go to sleep and I'll wake up the next morning and half of the work that I needed to do has already been done by my subconscious. So planning in the smallest level of increment that we use is the daily planning methodology. So once we've got that in place, that's generally for my work days, 5 days a week. I also make sure that I plan my weekends because if we don't plan our weekends, we know what happens. They just roll past very quickly. Then we move into the next increment, which is weekly planning. Now, weekly planning is just a touch more strategic than daily planning because now we're looking at the week as a block and saying, what are our major objectives for that time? What this means, though, is on a Friday afternoon, I'll do 2 plans. I'll do one for the week following, but I'll also do one for Monday, which is my top 6 things to do. Now, this is cyclical and it never stops. So the planning process becomes a daily activity. And during my daily planning process, that's generally a 5 to 10 minute exercise. Just writing down the top 6 things, prioritizing them, and making sure they go into the calendar. The weekly planning activity is about a 20-minute activity, and this is just making sure that I look at what's coming up in the week ahead of me, and that I've got my top 6 objectives for that week also penciled into my calendar. So we're now starting to move more into the strategic world. Then we move into monthly planning. Now, monthly planning generally moves one step further into strategy. So now we're looking at things like either revenue targets or sales targets or meeting targets for the month. And this should be done before the month begins. So generally what I'll do is on that Friday, the last Friday of the month, I'll do my daily plan for Monday. I'll do my weekly plan for the week following, but I'll also review my month, looking at my financials, making sure that I'm on track and setting objectives for the next month. Then we move into quarters. And the same thing happens. Now, anyone who's been working with me and come to one of my planning days, we do exactly the same process, but on a quarterly basis. Now, the reason we step back to quarterly is it's a little bit more strategic again, because now we're thinking in terms of bigger chunks. Now, the reason we want to do this is we want to make sure that we've got our daily activities done, our weekly focus, and this is all about focus and clarity. And then our monthly, just make sure we're tracking with our financials. And our quarterly means we can start moving into more project-oriented activities. And what you'll notice is as we're moving into these bigger chunks, you can have projects with multiple phases. So things that can happen in a quarter is the implementation of a marketing strategy. It can be the recruitment of an employee. It can be the identification of a new market sector that we're moving into. It could even be the launch of a new product. So now we're talking about substantial activities that are going to take more than any of the other time periods. Then we'll move into yearly planning, which, if we look at quarterly planning taking a day, I think yearly planning should be something that takes 1 to 2 days, and it should happen every year. Generally happens around or before Christmas, so that we can actually start our year with a fresh picture of what we're going to do for that year. You can see there's a lot of repetition in the planning process, but remember, it's not about the plan, it's about the planning, which means we need to be focused on planning all the time. When I ask people about their planning, it's not about showing me a business plan, it's about the planning methodology. And I want to make sure that my daily activities are linking back to my annual plans, so that we're not just working on things because they're in front of us, we're working on things because they're part of a bigger picture or bigger strategy. The last part of this picture that I like to look at is the 2, 3, 4, 5-year calendar. Now you'll notice I say calendar because to me, a plan is not a plan unless it's got dates wrapped around it. So what we need to consider around this is that if we're going to go into 5-year planning, one of my favorite ways to do this is a spreadsheet. And in that spreadsheet, I can actually quantify every single month between now and 5 years' time, and I can put dates on them. And I can start off with a basic outcome, which is where do I want to be in 5 years' time? How much income do I want to be generating? How much profit? How much time am I putting into the business? And then I can work backwards from a revenue point of view and a profitability point of view to make sure that there's enough financials within the business. And then I can work downwards from there and say, great, so how many employees do I need? And how much activity is each employee doing in what sector? And then I can look even further back into it and say, well, what sort of space do I need? Do I need multiple offices, or do I need one office? Does it need to be bigger? So I'm really looking at this quite from a numerical point of view, because the numbers don't lie. And when we're putting a business plan together, if we don't have like smart goals within the plan, it's very, very difficult to tell whether we're on track or not. Now, if we use this methodology, what happens is that 5-year calendar is a reference point for building a 1-year plan. The 1-year plan should be a reference point for the quarter for the month, and so forth and so forth, which means that every single plan that we're writing is linked to the bigger picture plan. So that's the planning methodology in a nutshell. Now, let's talk about how we get these compelling goals into actions. This is a pretty key part of the planning process. And when we talk about goals, it's nice to sit there and say, well, this year I want to increase my profitability or my take-home pay by $100,000. But dollars are just dollars. They're just numbers on a piece of paper. So how do we turn this goal into something exciting, or into something that's compelling? There's a 3-phase approach. So the first part is to identify the goal. And I want to make sure that that goal is big enough that it's actually substantial in growth, but not too big that it's actually outside of my realm of reality. And once I've established the goal, well, that's only really stage 1, right? Because the goal does not actually self-fulfill. I mean, it's nice to think that once we set a goal, all we have to do is visualize and we just look at it every day and it'll happen. But that's working on the be and not the do. So the do component of the be, do, have formula is going to be the actions. But we want to get some emotion in behind those actions. So often when we set a goal, the next part of the process, and I picked this up from Anthony Robbins, he talks about the rapid planning method. And he says, we really need to get some emotional drive behind that goal. So I need to know all the reasons why. So when we set a goal of improving our profitability by, I don't know, let's pick a number, 100,000. Well, the question is why? And we need to ask that question on several levels and say, well, what's it going to mean to me? What's it going to do? How am I going to feel at the end of achieving that goal? And the more emotion that we can put into this question, asking around the question why, the more compelling the goal will be. And then we can move into the action component, which is creating the tasks or what we need to do. So let's have a look at this from an actual worksheet point of view. Now, this worksheet, I'll make this available to everyone after the call today. But just to give you an idea of the goal to action worksheet, which is how we follow this methodology. Really simply, where it starts is if you look in the middle of this worksheet where it says what. So we start here first by writing down the goal in SMART format, which means measurable, achievable, realistic time frame. And we'll put that in that box right in the middle of the screen there. And we'll stick with the goal that we had. It might be to improve our profitability by 100,000. Now, then we move to this right-hand side where it says why. And we've got to come up with all the emotive reasons. Why do we need to achieve this goal? What is it going to do for us? How's it going to benefit us? How are we going to feel? And I've said at least 20 reasons, because the more reasons we can put in here, the better, right? This is the power pack behind the goal, because if we have compelling reasons to achieve the goal, the likelihood of achieving it is way, way greater. So what we do is we work through this why method, this why section, by asking the question to ourselves: why do I need to achieve the goal? How am I going to feel when I achieve the goal? What's it going to do for me as a person? What's it going to do for the people around me? What's it going to do for my customers? What's it going to do for my suppliers? And we just keep asking that question until we've got a nice solid case for why we need to achieve the goal. Then what we're going to do is move over to the left-hand column, and we're going to write down the actions. Now, this is a short form list, but in that list, you might have anything between 10 and 20 and 30 action points. Now, at the first point of time in writing these hows, we don't judge them. We don't sit there and say, what are the top 3 things? Anything that comes to mind that could drag you towards this goal, especially when we're in this high emotive state, we just jot down everything we can that actually could take us towards that goal. Now, some of the things are going to be ridiculous. Some of them are going to be unreasonable. But what we're going to do is we're just going to keep writing and keep writing and keep writing until we've got at least 10, possibly 20 action items that we can do that will move us towards that goal. So then what we're going to do is we're going to look at what obstacles we're going to encounter along the way, because I almost guarantee you, as soon as you set a goal and it's outside of your comfort zone, you're going to find all these reasons why not to. Now, if we don't deal with these obstacles, if we don't identify them, and then we don't talk about how we can get past those obstacles, we're setting ourselves up for failure. So really what we need to do here is we need to identify the obstacles, and then we talk about the solutions. How do we get past them? Now, some of the obstacles might be your own team. They're going to hold you back. Some of the obstacles might be external, and it might be just, like, okay, so if my goal is to improve my profitability by 100,000, and why would I do that? Well, if I can do that, I can actually renovate the house, and if I do that, I can take my kids on holidays, and if I can do that, I'm going to feel fantastic and in control of my business. And then I brainstorm all these ideas how, but what I soon realize is there's blockages. So these obstacles need to be identified, and then we need to talk about those solutions. Finally, all we really need to do is go through that list of how, the action items, and pick the top 3. Because we've got to remember the old Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule. When it comes to setting a goal and then turning it into actions, it's generally 20% of the activities that we're going to stipulate that are going to produce 80% of the result. So the brainstorming activity is critical because we need to identify what that top 20% is. And if we don't do that process, we'll just end up coming up with some pretty obvious stuff or something that's not compelling at all. So you can see here what we're doing is we're using this worksheet to actually convert an objective or a goal into something that is quite actionable. So let's keep moving. So when we talk about business plans, the other thing people ask is, well, what should be on the plan? See, here's the challenge most small business owners have is they're busy. And they're busy because they're in busyness, and they've got lots of clients, and they've got lots of work on the go, and they've got lots of things that they're dealing with on a daily basis. And so how do I find the time to plan? And once I do find the time to plan, how do I find the time to build this strategic direction for my business? Well, here's the key to business success. I learned this a long time ago, the word leverage. Now, if we think about leverage, what it means is it actually means we need to start thinking about how we can do more with less. Now, what does that mean? That means that if I'm already working 40 or 50 or 60 hours a week, and someone says to me, well, you need to grow your business, well, my immediate thought goes to, how do I actually do that when I'm already so busy? So really what we've got to think about here is we've got to think about how do we become more efficient or more effective with our time. Now, the simple answer here is to work out how can I do more in less time. And so there's only a few ways we can leverage a business. Now, the other way to look at this is if I break down my activities into components, then I can actually work on those individual components and put the components back together to get an overall improvement. So we need to start thinking in terms of leverage and asking questions like, how can I be more effective in what I do? How can I see more clients in a shorter period of time? How can I sell more products without investing more time? Now, there's only a few ways that we can leverage within a business, and we're going to talk about those in a moment. But if we think about what leverage is by definition, my favorite definition that I've heard is this one: do the work once and get paid forever. And when we talk about do the work once and get paid forever, what we're looking at is how do we systemize our business and how do we create components of our business that are reusable. Now, this by definition is what some people would call working on the business rather than working in the business. And the way to do this is to start thinking in terms of, well, okay, if I want to leverage myself in business, how do I do it? Well, Obviously, the first thing is to streamline my processes. So if I've got a process that I follow that requires me to think about it every time, that's not as efficient as having a checklist. So checklist is one of the most basic fundamental ways of leveraging. But let's talk about these different points of leverage and how we can work on those. Because from my perspective, there's 9 points of leverage in any business, and I break them down into two fundamental areas. The first one being cash flow. So how can I leverage my profitability of my business? And the second one being systems. And when we talk about systems, is how can I streamline or become more efficient? So if we start with the cash flow area, and let's break that down in its components, how can I leverage cash flow? Well, I need to look at things like leads. How can I leverage the way that I generate leads within my business? How can I get more leads by spending less money? And so we start focusing in on that area. And that might be by putting extra marketing strategies in place or different marketing and strategies in place or more effective ones. But we need to start measuring these areas. The next thing I can leverage is what's called conversion. And conversion is about converting from leads to customers. How can I improve my conversion rate on my sales process? How can I improve my conversion on my website? How can I improve my conversion from any inquiry? Because that makes me more efficient. Then we talk about average dollar sale, and that's really about how much people spend with us on average. And this is this is one point that most people don't invest enough time in. If I'm building a business, this is one of the very first places I will go to look for cash flow leverage. And I'll ask the client, I'll say, so what are your customers currently spending? And how can we increase the average dollar spend? Now, this is so highly leveraged because we can do it by doing upsells. And most people in business don't get the upsell idea or they don't implement it efficiently. Because what does an upsell actually mean? It means that someone's already buying from you at this point in time and all you're asking them to do is buy a little bit more. And the reason it's so effective, car yards use it, McDonald's use it, most of the bigger companies use this process because they understand that the extra sale is highly profitable. So that's a great leverage point as well. Number of transactions is another one, and this is really just about keeping um, clients coming back. And I want you to think about, do you have this in your business plan? So when we talk about business planning, we're talking about building systems to improve all of these areas. And the last one is profitability. Profitability, pretty straightforward. How can we increase our profit margins? This can be through a number of factors, putting your prices up, improving your guarantee, improving your marketing materials, etc. These are all areas we're not going to drill into in detail today because this is the planning methodology. We'll be talking about these by doing some research. In the systems side, the first thing we need to do is make sure we can measure what's going on within the business. And this one kills me because the amount of people I meet in business that are just flying by the seat of their pants and they don't know their numbers. If you don't know your numbers, how can you improve something that you can't measure? See, the numbers are everything in business. We're talking about numbers of leads. We're talking about conversion rate as a percentage. We're talking about average dollar sale as an exact number. We're talking about revenues. We're talking about profits. You need to measure all these things and you need to be able to put them onto a dashboard and use that dashboard to make your business decisions. If we're building a business system and we've got a business plan, part of it is putting the measurement mechanism in place. What it means is we can test because if we know the numbers and we change something, we can see the impact it has on our business system. But if we don't do the testing and measuring, the systems that we change, we might not be able to tell whether they're improving things or making things more difficult. The second part of the systems area is delivery mechanisms. How can we make sure that we're streamlining what we do? These are all areas that need to be covered within the planning methodology. The third one is systems themselves, right? So once we've got our delivery mechanism in place, what other systems can we put in place? Is it going to be a collection system for money? Is it going to be a lead generation system or a sales system? See, one of the key leverage points in a business is having a sales process that's documented and then taking it from documented to automated. With the tools that are available these days, we can do 50 to 60% of our marketing and sales online. But if we don't have a system in place, how can we then implement that into it? People is a big one, but don't get me wrong, getting people is probably one of the most critical aspects of leverage within a business. It's about getting the right people doing the right job. Now, if we're planning our business going forward, we have to assume that we are going to employ some people, whether they're contractors, part-time, full-time, it doesn't really matter. To grow a business beyond yourself, you're going to have some other people working for you. Now, the underlying problem with employing people is that people do it the wrong way around. What they do is they employ the people before they create the systems. So we need to plan for our systems to be in place so that we can then put people within into our systems as well. See, once we've got our plan in place, then the really critical part is to get into action. And what I mean by action is making sure that there's execution, or the do component. Now, the execution requires direction, right? So we need to know which way we're going, goals. Determination, because I guarantee you, as soon as you start putting a business plan in place, you're going to stress, because there's going to be everything that can possibly happen to block you is going to happen. Determination is about making sure we're going through the process and understanding that there's going to be some difficulty along the way. Discipline. Discipline is about moving back to the plan, because it's all too easy to throw your hands in the air and say, this is too hard, I might as well go get a job or work for someone else, or just keep it small. See, discipline means that I'm going to work on the plan even though everything around me is sort of trying to stop me from doing that. And this discipline to continue rolling out a plan, even if you fail in rolling out the plan, there's lessons to be had. Often people will say, oh, I'm not doing a business plan. Last time I did one, my business looks nothing like it. That doesn't mean the plan failed, because remember, it's not about the plan, it's about the planning. Focus. See, we need to have the plan in front of us every single day, and this is why we use things like 12-month goals, 90-day plans, monthly goals, weekly goals, daily plans, because that keeps us on track, and ultimate accountability to the numbers. So just an interesting abstract here. What I'd like to talk about is how to fail, because I often meet people in business, and you know what? They've done the business planning thing in the past. They don't do it anymore. It got too hard, and they learnt to fail. So let's talk about how you can fail and how you can guarantee failure, so that we can understand what actually occurs. See, failure usually starts with this. It starts with some excitement. What that means is someone sits down and they might actually have a chat with a friend, or they might sort of see a competitor who's doing something really well, and they get all inspired about growing their business. They get excited, and with that excitement comes a lot of energy. And it's fantastic when we're starting out a business, or when we've got a new project on the go. The excitement, or you might have a positive response to something that you've done, the excitement will drive you through. But see, what happens is after excitement, because excitement's usually fairly short-lived, we move into this next section of how to fail, and this is what's called avoidance. Now, what is avoidance? It's also known as denial. And this is where people will be sort of ignoring the plan. And they'll be saying, well, I'm not really sure how we're going, but I don't want to look, because if I look, then I'll know that I'm not going the way that I want to be going. So they move into this avoidance pattern. Now, the problem with avoidance is that if you don't look at the numbers, if you're not actively looking at the plan on a regular basis, of course you're going to be off track. See, if you look at your plan every 90 days and only write it every 90 days, you're not using it on a regular basis to do your daily and your weekly planning, then you're actually setting yourself up for failure. And the next step is what usually sort of cements it, and that's the excuses. Oh, the plan was too complex, or the plan didn't work, or I didn't have it in front of me, or it was the wrong plan. It was all these sorts of things. So the excuses will actually now cement the failure. And the final part of failure is blame. And blame to me is one of the most dangerous components, because you'll notice that those last three, avoidance, excuse, and blame, is really, that's where we become the victim in life. And the victim in life can tell you all the reasons why they didn't succeed. They can tell you whose fault it was. They can tell you all these lovely stories, but the truth of the matter is that they did not succeed in what they were trying to do, and they did not continue. So they didn't have that determination, that discipline, that focus. So we really got to think about how to fail. Now, if we think about what happens and the reason we fail, the first one is unclear focus. Now, if we have goals and they're not written down, they're not clear to us. And the way I can tell is if I ask the question of someone, what is your goal or what is your objective? If they can't reel it back to me immediately, generally speaking, those goals are not clear to them. With that unclear focus, the distractions can become bigger than the goal. And as those distractions become bigger than the goal, what happens is we get swayed off track. The second thing can happen, and this is quite common, is having the wrong goal. What do I mean by the wrong goal? Well, that just means that it was probably someone else's goal and we just inherited it, or we just thought it was a good idea at the time, but it actually wasn't ours. It was someone else's, or it was just something that we put in place because we thought that's what we wanted. Now, the issue with the wrong goal is you'll know, because when we ask all the reasons why, when we go back to that goal to action worksheet, we ask all those reasons why. If it's the wrong goal, you won't have a lot of reasons why, or it just won't resonate with you. Look, the third thing we need to think about is that there is no action plan. And so not going through that process of taking a goal and turning it into actions is usually where people fall over with their goal setting, and they say goals don't work. Well, goals don't work, people work. right? A goal is just a way of setting focus, and it's a way of getting that whole list of actions of the things that you need to do to be successful. So don't rely on the goals working for you, rely on you working and actually developing the plan that you can use to achieve those goals. And the last one is knowledge. And I just wanted to sort of just hone in on this for a few moments because what I think, and this is sort of a bit of a distinction that I've had recently, is often people say, well, I don't know how to write a business plan because I don't know what I need to do. Well, if you don't know what you need to do, guess what the first part of the plan is? It's research. See, and people will say it to me to this very day. Look, all you ever do is you tell people to go and read a book or to go and learn something. Well, of course I do, because the key to growing you as a person, the person you are, your identity, is to improve your knowledge. Now, how can you improve your knowledge? There's so many different ways, but the basics are reading books, listening to audio programs, going to seminars, speaking to experts. But if you don't have a plan to improve your knowledge, then chances of succeeding in achieving your goals are very slim because the knowledge part of the plan is key. And with any strategy within a business, if we sat down and said, let's put a marketing plan together, the first thing I'd be talking about is great. So what does the marketing plan need to achieve? What's the goal? And you might say, well, I need leads. And I'd say, how many leads? And we get a number, so we get a smart goal. So where are those leads coming from? Well, I don't know. So if we don't know, guess what the first part of that activity is to do the research and say, well, what are the other people? What are the competitors using? What are the strategies that are in the marketplace that potentially will give me those leads? And then we do the research into each one of those strategies. So you might need to read a book on strategic alliances. You might need to read a book on how to get more referrals, or maybe even multiple books. Because if you know that referrals is the major part of your lead source, surely if you created a referral system, you would get even more of those again. But how do you create a referral system? Great question. There's at least 100 books on how to build a referral-based business out there. I'm not going to recommend any because you can Google it. But if you don't actually set a knowledge building process as part of your plan, chances are you're going on limited knowledge. So don't fall victim to trying to create a plan or a marketing plan without really knowing what marketing strategies there are available and how to implement them. So the key to success here is to actually make sure that you're building your knowledge. Here's the last one that's really key here is mental barriers. Now, what I mean by mental barriers, inevitably, the identity that we need to build is also the identity that's holding us back. And what I mean by that is some people say, I'm no good with numbers. So as soon as you say that, you've just made it true for yourself. I can convince you that you will be good with numbers if you actually realize what the purpose of those numbers are. You know, I talk about this often and I say, look, is the speedo in a car important? Well, the speedo in the car tells you how fast you're going. Is that really important? It is for only one reason, because we have speed limits. And if you know it's a 60k zone, the only way you can tell if you're doing 60k is to look at the speedo. But if there was no speed limit, then the speedo is not so important because you drive at what you consider a safe speed. So the mental barriers often are that we don't think we're any good with marketing. We're no good with numbers. I'm not comfortable employing people. I've had bad experience. My friends have bad experience. These are all mental blockages. And if we don't deal with those mental barriers, what's going to happen is our plan will fail. So when we start thinking about our knowledge also includes our own personal development. Because if you truly believe that you can build a business that works without you, then it's just a matter of taking the first step. But if you don't believe it's possible, well, guess what? You're right. So I want you to think about what are those mental barriers as well. And in your plan, what are you doing to deal with those? So let's look at this in context. Today we've talked about four major areas. And the first one being dreams. And you might sort of look back now and say, well, okay, I can see how it fits because from our dreams come our goals. And from our goals, we create our plans. And from our plans, we actually create an action item list. Now, we need to make sure those actions are actually executed. And if they're not, we then need to do the reflection as to why not. But we call this the success factor, right? And I want you to do this little exercise for yourself. I want you to go through each one of these. And I want you to rank yourself on a scale of 1 to 10. And so if we look at dreams, and, you know, 10 out of 10 would be someone who's actually got a fantastic dream chart. They've identified all the areas in their life. They have a bucket list, you know, 101 things to do before I die. They've literally got pictures of everything. They've got the prices on everything. That's a 10 out of 10. If you've never dreamt before about what's possible, if you've never put anything in writing, that's let's not do zeros, let's do a 1. I just want you to rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10 for dreams. Then I want you to do the same around the goals. I want you to rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10. And goals means I have my goals in writing and they fit the SMART formula. Then after that, what we want to do is talk about plans. And do you have a plan? Does it have dates on it? Are you viewing that plan on a regular basis? Once again, on a scale of 1 to 10. And then with your action, do you follow your plan? Or are you just busy every day? Now, the success factor, if we think about a perfect score, 10 out of 10 in each of those areas is 10,000. But in reality, what happens is when you do this number, you'll find it's a lot less than that. Now, that's not good nor bad. It's just a reality check on yourself because I want you to think about what is your success factor and what are the areas you need to focus in on. Here's an interesting statistic for you, statements versus likelihood. This was a study done by Brigham University. And what they talked about here is they said, when people say they have a good idea, the likelihood of them succeeding with that good idea is about 10%. And then what happens is, if we want to make it 25%, what they need to do is actually verbalize or commit to doing it. Now, to make it a 40% chance of being successful, we need to put some dates around things so you can see where dates fit into the plan. Plans must have dates because the dates increases us from a 10% idea to a 40% chance of getting success. If you've got that plan detailed, then all of a sudden it goes to 50, 60% if someone else gets to see your plan. And if you really want success, you can go for a 95% success rate by committing to dates and sharing your progress. This is what regular progress meetings are all about. So make sure that you've got your plan in place, make sure that you've committed to dates, and make sure that you're sharing your progress with someone else. So I just want to sort of get to the end of this and wrap up on a few pointers. James Rohn said it really well. He said, "Never wish life were easier, just wish you were better." Because what we can focus on in our plan is how we can improve you and how we can improve your attitude to your business and how we can improve your skill set. We can't control what goes on outside. The second thing he said was work harder on yourself than you do on your job. And I often see people undervalue their own learning, their own knowledge, their own skill sets because they think that they can go and work harder on their job. You need to be focused on yourself, you know. And look, I just want to finish up today's sort of conversation on planning. I hope it's given some clarity. I will provide those templates that I mentioned through the call as part of the thank you email. If you haven't received them, please email me and I'll send them out to you. But there's an interesting story that I'd like to share, and it's about this young kid, and he lives in this village, and he hears about this very successful man who lives in the palace in the village, and he knocks on this man's door and he says, "Hi, I just want to find out what is your secret to success." And this gentleman says, "Sure, come straight in." And he brings this young guy into his palace, and as they're walking through the palace, this kid's getting very excited, and so they keep walking. All of a sudden, they're out on the beach out the back. And this kid's getting a bit puzzled, and this old man is saying, "Just come with me." And they walk into the water. And as they walk into the water, this kid's starting to get a bit nervous. What's going on here? When are you going to tell me the secret to your success? And as they get to shoulder depth of water, and this kid's starting to look a bit sort of worried, this man grabs his hand and he pushes this kid under the water and he holds his head underwater. Within about 1 minute, this kid starts thrashing around, thrashing around, thrashing around. He finally jumps out of the water and he goes, the old man looks at him and he says, "Son, the day that you want success as much as you wanted that last breath of air, that's the day you'll be successful." Now, the moral of the story is pretty simple. When it comes to planning, it's just as easy not to do as it is to do. If you're serious about the success of your business, if you're serious about the growth, if you're serious about the lifestyle that you're trying to achieve, you'll put the time into the plan and you'll make sure that you're following that plan on a daily basis. And if you do that, your success is just about guaranteed. So that hopefully gives you a good summary of what the planning process is all about. I'm happy to fill in the details for anyone who has any questions if you want to email me back. Other than that, I just want to thank you very much for your time. And now it's really time for you to get into action. So get onto the planning methodology. I'll be sending out some of the templates that we've spoken about today, and I look forward to hearing about your success. Thank you very much for your time, guys.